Yes, I'm watching the microphone.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to record this session for those who want to see it again. I'll just go back, share my screen. Thank you, and let's start. Let's start the slideshow. So, noise reduction and sharpening, or how I learned to stop wiring and love high ISO. I think tonight is going to be a bit of an eye opener for a lot of people. Noise. What noise? Why should we worry about it? So what is noise? Where does it come from? Noise, that's information in the digital image that just doesn't exist in reality. And we'll see why this occurs in a moment. There are two types of noise. We have color noise and luminance noise. Color noise is the thing that will kill your photo. Luminance noise, not so much, because that luminance noise can look like film grain, and that's less of a distraction than color noise actually is. You generally find the color noise in the shadow areas of the image, and luminance noise can be seen everywhere. So where does it come from? Well, color noise occurs for one or more of the following reasons. We're going to look at three of these tonight. One is high ISO, underexposure, significant cropping, or enlarging a photograph in the wrong way. So this is where you've got a crop of a photograph that you then want to show really big. Luminance noise occurs with one or more of the following reasons: high ISO, significant cropping, or enlarging the digital photograph. So you'll see there's a crossover. Somebody's buzzing. Can you see who that is, Lou?
Sorry, John, I'm trying to find who it is.
Oops. So, high ISO. So does anybody want to take a guess as to what, as now Lou's just muted everybody. Anybody want to take a guess what ISO means? No, okay. Well, there are two meanings for ISO. What it does not mean is the International Standards Organization. If it did, all cameras would have the same amount of noise for the same ISO setting, which obviously they don't. I've got an old Olympus E500 that ISO 3200 would be much noisier than my new Canon R5. So if it meant the International Standards Organization, then they would be the same. So the official meaning for ISO comes from the Greek word isos, which means equivalent to. But the unofficial one, which I think is perhaps more accurate, is it stands for increasingly shitty outcome. So there we go. Now, one thing that a lot of people get confused about is that increasing the ISO increases the sensitivity of the sensor. It doesn't. What it actually does is, somebody is still buzzing.
John, you're muted.
Oh. No, I'm not. I'm actually just playing a joke with you. So it comes. So what happens is a sensor only has one level of sensitivity. This is just physics. This is the way the electronics works. So when you increase the ISO, you actually increase the amplification of the signal that is generated by the light hitting the sensor, which means any stray particles entering that sensor from heat, noise, and what have you, also get counted as being a source of light. So this graph here, you can think of this as a histogram. And this shows how a sensor captures light. If you imagine you've got a scene which has 14 stops of brightness in the scene, then your sensor, 3/4 of it will be devoted to capturing the brightest 2 stops of light. So if you underexpose, then your sensor is not picking up as much information as it possibly can. What this means is that when you're taking a photo, if you can, you want to push the exposure as far to the right as you possibly can, but without clipping highlights. Now, this is the complete opposite way around to the human eye. The human eye can actually pick up details in shadow areas really well, but it's not very good at picking up details in the light areas. So taking a photograph, if you expose it to the right without blowing highlights, you can always darken it. But what it means is that your shadow details then move into the area of the sensor where it actually resolves more information, so you don't get as much noise. So underexposure, which is basically what I've just been saying. So by underexposing your photo and then pushing the exposure, your editor has to invent pixels to make up for that information that you couldn't capture because you underexposed. Noise in the darker areas usually gives rise to color noise, which will kill your photo. And noise across the image is generally luminance noise. Similarly, if you crop the photo, then you can get severe noise because if you crop it too far, because again, the software has to invent pixels to make up for that apparent lack of resolution. Here's an example. This is taken inside Durham Cathedral. This was handheld and shot at ISO 12,800. Now, I don't know how good this is going to come over with zoom, but you may be able to detect in the bottom part of the photo, in the benches and on the floor, there's a lot of color noise in there. But if you can't see that, let's show you something a bit closer. That doesn't look quite so good, does it? There's a lot of noise in that. This was shot on a Canon 5D Mark IV at ISO 12,800. So, like I said earlier, enlarging a photo, if you crop it too much, you have to interpolate to create new pixels. And if your original photo has noise, like the one I've just shown you, then the noise will also be enlarged. However, is noise really an issue? Well, yes, if you can see it and it bothers you, noise is a problem, you need to fix it. Yes, if it's another judge. If a judge spots noise, they're going to complain about it and you'll lose marks because of it. No, if you're going to print it, any luminance noise in particular will just disappear as part of the printing process. No, if you're going to show it on social media, because you're going to show a reduced image, be downsized to put up there, and almost certainly no for everybody else. If you take a photograph of your children and you shoot it at ISO 3200 and you show it to your partner, they're almost certainly going to say, oh, it's a really nice photo, dear. I like that. And you've got a nice photo of the children or grandchildren. But noise is a problem for me. So how can I fix it? Okay. So tonight, the talk is about noise reduction and sharpening. And that's because those are two sides of the same coin. Noise reduction is going to work by blurring the image to smooth out the noise, where sharpening is going to sharpen the noise back again. So as I say, it blurs the image and it works much better with raw images rather than JPEGs. So if you're shooting JPEGs and you're shooting at a high ISO, this is a reason where you may want to reconsider that decision. And I will show you this tonight. And then finally, noise reduction in Photoshop is actually quite primitive compared to Lightroom and Adobe RAW. And this implies that you should fix noise early in your processing. And that actually makes sense, because if you've got a noisy image like I've just shown you, how can you judge what the colors and the sharpness should look like while you've still got the noise there? But don't think, oh, I'm using Photoshop, that can do everything. It doesn't do noise reduction, not yet anyway. So let's have a look at a demo. So let me just flick over to
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
If you're using Photoshop and you use the raw processor,
Yeah.
is that okay, or is the Photoshop raw processor not good enough?
No, the raw processor, which is a Adobe Camera Raw, is well, I'm going to show you that now. It will do some of it, but it's not that great in actual fact. So I'm going to show you that now. Let's go into the develop module. This is Lightroom, but the raw processor is the same. We have the same controls in here. Now I've pulled all the sharpening and all the noise reduction back. So as we get rid of the digital noise, I'm just going to move the color slider up a bit to get rid of those colored pixels. And that goes to about there. And that's got rid of all of those colored pixels, but we still have a lot of luminance noise, which I approach by moving the luminance noise slider. And as I do that, you can see it's actually gone really quite mushy. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me show you another example. So let's go into my wildlife folder. So this is actually the worst of all worlds. So this is a photo that I was down at the London Wildlife Centre with Simon, Kevin and Lou. And this is actually a cropped photo. So if I show you how much I've cropped on this, it's actually quite a severe crop, because I was only shooting with a 70 to 200 with a 2x teleconverter. It's dark in there and I've had to crop it. So this is actually the worst of all worlds that we can do here. And if I zoom in on this, and you can see that the bird itself, this is a sand martin, I believe, is not that great. And I want you in particular to look at the purple flowers as I adjust the color reduction slider to get rid of the luminance noise. Can you see how those flowers, the color, particularly in the up against the cliff face there, have lost all their vibrance?
Yeah.
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 So this is a problem with the way Lightroom and Photoshop in Adobe Camera Raw handle color noise. If we then get rid of all the luminance noise, so let's get rid of that, and this has gone really quite horrible, really. I wouldn't put this up on anything like this. So that's how Photoshop, Lightroom and Photoshop Elements handles noise. So that's using conventional noise reduction, but there are some alternatives. So what else can we do? Well, we have third-party applications, and this is what I'm going to show you. So there is one called Topaz Labs Denoise AI, and this will work on both JPEG and RAW, but the performance can be slow depending on your combination of CPU and GPU. And don't ask me if I can tell you whether your system will be slow or not. There's just no way I can tell you. But you can use it either standalone as a plugin. So if your software that you're using to edit the photos doesn't support plugins, you can use that software as a standalone. Then there's On1 No Noise AI, which works best on RAW files. It will work on the intermediate ones like JPEGs, TIFFs, PSDs, and the like, but it works best with RAW. It's the most interactive of the noise reduction applications, as I'm just about to show you. And again, you can use this either as a standalone or as a plugin. And then finally, one that I'm not going to show you in operation, but I will show you the results, which is DxO Pure Raw. This only works on RAW files and it's only standalone. So you have to take your RAW file, put it into DxO Pure Raw, export a DNG, import that into your editing software. So it's a bit of a convoluted workflow, but I think it probably does the best noise reduction out of all of them. But the workflow isn't the easiest. So let's have a look at some examples. Let me flip back to Lightroom. So I'm going to go back to Durham Cathedral. I am going to go back to Durham Cathedral, I promise. There we go. So I'm going to go into denoise. This is the Topaz denoise application. And I'm going to find my CR2, the raw file. So there. Let me just resize this. Denoise and Durham Cathedral. So I'm going to take my raw file, which is this one, and I'm just going to drag it and drop it into there. This is going to load the image, and it's going to pull up one of its AI noise reduction split view. That's what I want. Okay, so Topaz denoise has 4 different models for denoising a photo. I'm going to zoom into 200% on this to give you a better idea of what it's actually doing. And this is why I don't think this is necessarily the most interactive, because every time I move something, I have to actually change what you're seeing, or it changes what you're seeing. So I hope you can see on here, the left-hand side is the original side, is the original photo, and the right-hand side shows what the clear AI model is doing to actually get rid of the noise. And hopefully you can see on this that there's actually quite a difference there. But I'm going to change this, and we'll try another one. Let's try low light and see how that comes out. Again, it's still rendering. It's now finished rendering. And again, it's got rid of the noise. And then we have another one called severe noise, which I think is probably going to work best on this. There you go. That's got rid of all of the noise for you. And I haven't done anything. All I've done is I've left the settings on auto, and I've just dropped the image in there, and I've tried the different models to see which one works the best. What could be easier? But there's another one. Let me just close out of this. Close that scene.
John, what does that cost, that utility?
I think it's about £70, something like that. It's very inexpensive. I'm going to give you links later to show you where that is. Let's try it. This is on one no noise. We'll try that in here. So this is the most interactive. You'll see as we move things around, it is so much faster, but it just takes a little while longer just to load the image up. This only has one model. You don't have to worry about, do I need low light or clear or severe noise? This only has one model. And as we move around, you don't have to refresh everything. And again, let's zoom into 200%. So again, left-hand side is the original, right-hand side is the noise reduced version. Any comments from anyone? Can you see that?
What program was that called again?
This is on one no noise.
Right.
And again, I haven't moved any sliders. All I've done is I've just dropped the image in it.
So, John, the program finds the noisy bits. You don't have to point out where the noisy bits are.
No, not at all.
Is this plugged into Lightroom, John?
You can use it as a plug-in to Lightroom, yes.
What have you done?
So what I've done is I've actually found the raw file and dropped it in there. And the reason being is that this works best on raw files. So
you're not using it as a plugin?
No, you can use it as a plugin.
You're using it as a standalone?
Yes. And the reason is because if you use it as a plugin, then Lightroom has to render your raw file as something else, either a TIFF or a PSD. And although this works with a TIFF or a PSD, it doesn't work as well, in my opinion.
Do you export it from this program as a raw file?
No, well, you can do. You can export it. So if I click on apply, that blue button, that will now then go red. And then I've got the export button down here in the lower right-hand corner that I can click on. Then I've got an option to export it as a DNG, which is an Adobe specification raw file. And that way, that gives me full editing abilities.
So would you do your other processing before, your other raw processing before you do this or after?
After. So I would always do my noise reduction first, because otherwise it's hard to actually work out what it should look like. I don't know what the sharpness should be. I don't know what the color should be because there's all the noise in there. Does that answer your question, Ralph?
Yes, thank you.
So, you know, we've got an absolute, I think we've got a pretty stellar noise reduction there. What does everybody else agree, or any other?
Big improvement.
Okay. So I can either click on export or I can click on done. If I click on done, I'll get it here.
And that's a 200 magnification as well.
This is at 200%, yeah.
John, I tried Topaz Lab Denoise,
Yeah.
but my computer, I don't know, obviously my computer's a bit old and it would take too long to actually do an image.
Mhm.
Would it be better to do the other one, the ON1?
I'd suggest you download a trial example or trial version.
Yeah, that's what I did with the other one, Topaz.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't tell you for sure, Veronica.
Right, okay.
As I said earlier about Topaz, some people have detected a severe performance issue, but it depends on their particular combination of CPU and GPU, and it's impossible to say.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks.
So this is on one. I'm just going to cancel that, and then we'll just go back into Lightroom. And then I've got this one, which is DxO Pure Raw. Now, ignore the fact there's a color shift in here. Color shifts are actually easy to change. But I actually think if we compare this to on one, my feeling is that Pure Raw produces a better result than on one. But you can only use this on a raw image. You cannot use it on a JPEG or a TIFF. And you have to use it first and then import it into your editing application. It's a bit of a convoluted workflow. Let's go back and have a look at the wildlife one that I did. So this is the noisy photo, and this is one after I pushed it through DxO. Notice how this time I don't lose the color vibrance in the flowers, and I've still got a reasonably good image. Okay, I know it's not going to be an award-winning photo. The light was pretty poor, and I just haven't got a long enough lens. But that's what DxO looks like.
And this is luminance noise.
So what's left is really luminance noise, but there's not very much left in there now. The noise is pretty much gone.
Yeah, incredible.
It's a difficult photo for me to get because I just don't have the right lens, and the light was when we should have been there early in the morning rather than late in the afternoon. So if you push something up to boost the shadows because it's a dark photo, this is one of the consequences that you can't get it. Let me show you another couple of photos though. So this is a photo of what it would be my award-winning ivy on a garden wall. This is shot at ISO 100 to give you an idea of what an ISO 100 photo looks like. This is the same image shot at ISO 25,600.
Oh my God.
Then we'll run it through Topaz Topaz denoise. And yes, all right, this is never going to be an award-winning photo. And it's shot at ISO 25,600. But if that's the only option I've got, that actually isn't that bad, really. And then I've got a similar one where it's shot through on one no noise. And again, you know, when you consider that we're coming from that and we're ending up with that, I don't think that's that bad. But we can go further. This is one shot at ISO 51,200. Okay, now nobody's ever going to shoot at ISO 51,200 unless you have to. But if we look at the severe noise, this is what Topaz will do eventually, which I think is pretty remarkable. And no noise. There are some things where, you know, we're shooting at 51,000, you know, so you do lose some detail. That's inevitable. But, you know, if I had to shoot at that and I had to rescue a photo, maybe it's a family photo shot in a coal mine or something, and I've got no flash, I think that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that is.
So this is another part of my garden, again, shot at 51,200. And then we've got, this is where Topaz standalone isn't quite as good as actually running it as a plugin. And I don't really understand why. This is the plugin, which seems to work much better. This is Topaz Noise Run standalone. And then we have no noise. So, so that's noise reduction, you know, with the third-party applications. I think it's pretty remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed.
Just to show you what it would look like if we do send some of this over. Let's just get rid of all my noise reduction stuff. So let's just send this over to Topaz denoise. So I'm just going to send it over as a TIFF, and we can see the whole round trip operation. Probably got you up. There we go. So this has loaded the photo up into denoise. It's done my noise reduction. All I need to do is click on save image. They'll ask me what I want to actually save it as. I'm just going to click it on save. So there's no messing around with sliders. You don't have to do that. If you want to do it and make some adjustments, you can. But that's something that you need to try on your own photos. So this takes a little while just to save the file out. So that's finished that, and this should be my file, I think. Okay, that's interesting. I don't know. I think my preview hasn't refreshed. Hang on a second. This does work, I promise you. Okay. It's interesting. I haven't updated it, but there have been reports of this actually not working for some people. It does work because I've done it. And this is what no noise clear looks like. Don't you just live demos? We can do this. We can do the same thing with no noise. Hit it in on one no noise. So this is going to bring it into no noise. So this is bringing it in as a PSD. This is just taking a little while to render. You can see down here we've got a process. So there we go. We get a message popping up which says non-raw photo detected, and no noise is optimized for raw files, not as non-raw ones. But there you go. So there's using On One as a plugin, so you can certainly do it. But again, I just don't think that it's quite as good as doing it on the raw file. You can see it's gone a bit mushy again. Okay.
Good job.
Any questions?
No.
Comments?
Good.
Wow.
Big difference. What was the ISO on this photo?
12,800.
Do you shoot at that with that high in ISO normally?
Not if I can help it. I'm in a cathedral here
No.
where I can't use a tripod or a monopod.
Mm.
It's simply not allowed.
Mm.
So to get my shutter speed to something that I could actually hold, I had to shoot at ISO 12,800.
Right.
Sometimes you don't get the choice. Sometimes you have to shoot at a high ISO. Now, if you're shooting wildlife, for example, in a dark area, you've got to shoot at a high ISO. Otherwise, you're never going to get it. You haven't got any chance of getting it remotely sharp.
Yep.
So sometimes you simply don't have the choice. Normally, I'd be shooting at ISO 100, but this is a case where it's just impossible for me to do so.
Have you heard of Neat Image?
Neat Image?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. It's another denoising application that somebody told me about.
So the best way to reduce noise in your photo is to make sure you've got your exposure correct. Exposed to the right, shoot at ISO 100. You don't always get the opportunity to do that, of course. Sometimes you simply can't shoot at ISO 100. You might be reacting to something and you need to, you've got it on auto ISO to try and keep your shutter speed to a reasonable size or reasonable value. But third-party applications can produce really great results, even on very noisy photos. And as you've seen, they're dead easy to use. I didn't have to move any sliders, right? Actually, there's one other thing I'm just going to show you. All come as fully functional trial versions, so you can download them and try them out for yourself on your own photos. And here's the other thing, modern cameras will take photos which may not even need noise reduction. You know, my Canon R5, for example, I can quite happily shoot that ISO 1600, 3200, and you're probably not even going to notice the noise. But you don't always have the opportunity to actually take the photo at a exposed to the right and at ISO 100. Sometimes you have to shoot at a higher ISO. But there's one thing I was going to show you actually for noise reduction, which I think is actually something to keep an eye on for those of you using Photoshop. let's just file this over into Photoshop. Where's my Photoshop? Can anybody see it? It's there. Okay. Got it. So I don't know if those of you who have the full-blown version of Photoshop have ever played around with neural filters.
With what, sorry?
Neural filters. Neural filters are Adobe's version of AI filters. And they've got a whole set in here. So you've got things like skin moving, removing JPEG artifacts, style transfer. These are the featured ones. These are the ones that Adobe think are good to go. They're feature complete. They're fully working. Then we have a set of beta ones, including Smart Portrait. This is where you can make people look old, make them smile, change direction they're looking, all this kind of stuff, a whole load of other stuff. And then we have this area here called waitlist. And the first one on the waitlist is something called noise reduction. In 2 weeks, Adobe have got their Adobe Max conference, where they launch the next major version of Photoshop and Lightroom and a whole load of other applications. It would not surprise me if that version of Photoshop pushes their noise reduction neural filter further up into this list and make it available for everybody to use. Now, that's obviously not going to come to those of you who are using Photoshop Elements. You'd have to get a new version of that to get that feature. I have no idea whether this is going to be pushed up, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was. And it wouldn't surprise me if they include a sharpening AI option in there as well. And this will come out on the 26th of October.
What version is that going to be?
Sorry?
What version will that be?
It'll be the next version of Photoshop.
What, do you know what it'll be? I don't know. What have you got? Which one?
I've got the latest version. I can't remember what version it is. I can never remember where they put the
later than 20.
It's their latest. Oh, hang on. That's why I can't see it because I'm in there. So I'm on version 22.5.1.
Okay.
So you know, I've mentioned about the third-party applications. You can download those as trial versions. You can do that today. They work today. But in a couple of weeks, there's a new version of Photoshop, which may have their version of noise reduction AI. At the moment, it's still waitlist, so it's not available just yet. Okay. So I think, unless anybody has any other questions, I think now would be a good time to take a break.
There's just one thing you can. There's one other thing you can do for static shots. Is actually take several shots. You know, take 5 or 10 shots. Because the noise is random, if you take 10 shots and then stack them and do an average, all the noise gets cancelled out.
Yes,
so you end up with a cleaner
yeah, you can certainly do that, but it does mean you've got to take photos of things that aren't moving.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that might be better than well. Yeah, you can increase your ISO, but you can do it handheld because it will align it as well. So you
certainly can do that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, you're right, Simon. Yeah, you can certainly do that. But I think it's, you know, I haven't come across anything yet that I wouldn't run through either no noise or if I owned it. Pure raw. I actually own denoise and no noise. I've had denoise for about a year, and used it on several photos, and I've had no noise since summer. And I think for my photos, no noise is better than denoise, but it's something you really need to try on your own photos and on your hardware. And those are the links so you can download them. You'll have access to this PDF. I'll distribute this probably tomorrow, and so you'll be able to see it then, or wait until see what Adobe does in 2 weeks.
Looks like Topaz have got an offer on at the moment, $60.
Yeah, I wonder why that might be.
Yeah, quite. Yeah.
Any other questions?
John, at the beginning, you said that noise disappears when you print a photo.
Yes.
Why? How does that work?
Okay, so when you print a photo, you squirt a little bit of ink onto the paper and the ink splashes. So that helps smooth out the noise. Also, the ink will then use capillary action to spread through the fibers of the paper. And that also helps to smooth out the noise.
So those photos that you've just been demonstrating, if you printed those, there wouldn't be any noise on them.
The color noise would be there.
The
because the color noise doesn't get smoothed out, but luminance noise.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Having said that, I would probably still run it through the noise reduction anyway, because the chances of me only showing a photo as a print is pretty remote.
Right.
And it doesn't take that long, as you've seen, just to run it through the software. So unless Topaz denoise is slow on your hardware. But I do suggest you just download these versions and try them. They all work standalone, and 2 of them work as a plugin. But I do think that actually as a standalone, no noise actually works better.
Right. Interesting.
Anything else? No? Are you all stunned by what I've just shown you?
No, it's good.
A little bit.
No, it means that now there's no reason to be scared of shooting at high ISO. Anything else?
Will it be available to view on the club site as a link? I came in late for so.
I will send you a link where you can download it.
Oh, okay.
So
I'm not sure I even don't. I probably believe I need to be even a step further back, but this is very interesting. Yeah.
Well, it makes noise reduction a piece of cake because you don't have to do anything. So you just put it into an application and let it sort itself out. If you want to adjust some of the sliders, you can. But it's something you need to play around with on your photos. Anybody else? No? Okay, so I think we'll take a break here. If we can aim to be back by about 9:05, that'd be fantastic.
But what's going to be the next part of the meeting? This is now.
So this is about reducing noise.
Yeah.
The next part is going to be about sharpening the photo.
They're sharpening the photos. Right. Good. Brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah. 10 past then.
5
past. 5 past.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
And don't worry, I will distribute that document so you'll all have a copy of it. And then the video will link to that as well, so you can download the video.
There was also talk about one of the earlier ones is going to finish on the 18th. I haven't looked at the site for a while. Have we got anything else up there that's live or available, or do you take them down every so often?
No, I take them down every so often because otherwise it just uses up my disk space.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, then I'll catch up with you on that. Okay.
Thanks, John.
Okay, Tim. Are you convinced about shooting at a higher ISO if necessary?
I wouldn't go comfortably during daylight at much more than about 1600, to be honest with you.
Well, you don't need to worry so much about it because it's really easy to fix. So
Yeah, you know me in computers.
yeah, but this is all you have to do is open up the application and drop the image in there, and that's it.
Yeah,
Don't
it
have to
is fairly straightforward, I must admit. Yeah.
leave everything on auto. That's what I do.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Okay. Anybody else want to have a chat? Ronnie O'Sullivan 141 in case anybody's interested.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, okay. I shouldn't start playing at this time of night, but I'm trying to find some information on my own system. Okay.
Unfortunately, it's impossible to say how these things are going to work on your hardware, which is why you need to download the trial versions and just play with them, test them out on your images and see what happens.
John, have you tried to see the difference between using it as a standalone and having it as part of the workflow on so that it's not working on the raw file?
Which one?
ON1.
Yes.
And?
It's not as good.
So it's significantly different.
Yeah, even on one site, it's not as good.
Mm.
They've optimized it to work on raw files. What it's actually doing, so Camera Raw and Lightroom are what's called a raw converter. And so it reads the file bit by bit, basically, and says, right, oh, this should be this color. And it's got this, this is what it's part of the detail it's supposed to be part of. And that that software hasn't changed for, well, they were on version 2015, I think, something like that. So that hasn't changed, but that core software hasn't changed for quite some time, about 6 years. Whereas On1 have actually reimagined that conversion process from scratch. And so they're doing a whole raw conversion and saying, okay, this is actually what it should be like. And it's based around artificial intelligence. So they've reimagined the raw conversion. And that's why it's just so much better with a raw image rather than as a plugin. Have I explained that well enough?
Yep.
Is On1 the brand?
Yes.
Yes.
The famous sort of Topaz, the equivalent.
Yeah.
And then the application is No Noise AI.
Yeah. You'll get the link tomorrow, Natalie.
Yeah.
So
yeah. What other things do they do?
Oh, well, they've got their own software for processing images called On1 Photo Raw. They've just released their latest version. I mean, I'm sure it's got nothing to do with Adobe coming out with their new software in 2 weeks. I'm sure it's got nothing to do with that. But they've just released the latest version of their software.
Right.
I used to own it. I don't anymore because I just simply don't use it. It's just I didn't want to spend. But they've got a few things, some effects plugins that you can use as well.
Clever. They're very clever.
But of the DxO Pure Raw is also a raw converter. I think it probably does the best job at reducing noise, but the workflow is just really convoluted. So
that looks quite complicated.
It's not as complicated as you think, though, really.
Well,
once you've got the image out of On1, you just import it into Lightroom as you do now.
If you have, are you still there?
Yeah.
You're still there. So if you have the No Noise AI as
Yeah.
standalone.
Yeah.
So you download that as an application, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So then when you open your image,
Yeah.
do you open it in Lightroom and then drag it across to
No. I mean, my workflow is to import everything into Lightroom.
Yeah.
I go through all of the images, decide which ones are the keepers and which ones are just going to get deleted.
Yeah.
Then look at them and say, okay, this one is really noisy. I need to fix the noise in it. And at something like anything less than ISO 1600,
Mm-hmm.
I'm quite happy to do that inside Lightroom. But
Mm-hmm.
anything more than that, then I look for the file using Windows Explorer, or on the Mac, it'll be the Finder. Find the file and drag it over into
No Noise.
into No Noise. Actually, let me just show you something else. One other thing as a slight aside.
John, I use No Noise, but you can just click on in Lightroom, editing, and it takes you into the program.
But it doesn't take the raw file into the program. It takes an intermediate file.
All right.
Lightroom doesn't pass over a raw file.
What kind of file does it take over, did you say?
It'd be an intermediate file, so it'd be a PSD or a TIFF.
It's a TIFF. It's a TIFF, yeah.
But so
it still works quite well.
Yeah, but I think it works best as on the raw file, in my opinion, on my photos.
Mm.
When you launch On One standalone, you get this screen with this dialog right in the middle with a blue Open Photos button.
Right.
Open Photos. This takes you into a dialog where you can go and search for your image. There's my CR2, and it just brings it in.
But would you go and search in Lightroom or where?
No, you just search using that dialog. I'll do this again. So I'm on the On One application, and I'm not in Lightroom. So I need to finish first. Let's cancel this.
Pictures look all skew. They're not.
So we've got this thing in the middle of the screen. This is On One. I click on the blue Open Photos button.
Right.
And then in this dialog, which pops up, I just find the file. So I'm nowhere near Lightroom at this stage.
But what is that? Why are the files there?
Because this
is your master file, isn't it?
Yeah, this is where my files are stored on my computer.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So I'm not in Lightroom at this stage. And then once I've exported the file, then I can simply go over to Lightroom. I can either right click and do synchronize, or I can do import and import the files that it's generated.
So John, I'm a little bit lost now without jumping in. That set of logos along the bottom are your applications then?
No, I'm in Windows. So these, sorry, hang on. Yes, these are, so the ones that got yellow lines underneath them are the applications that are running.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Because I haven't got that, have I?
Yeah, so Natalie, so all you do, start the On One No Noise application. It'll look exactly like this. Click on Open Photos, and this dialog opens up, and find your raw image. So this is showing.
Would that open up on my computer?
Sorry?
Would that open?
Yes, yes, you'd have something similar to this.
If you're using Windows, it will.
Yes, if you're using the Mac, it'll look similar to.
Using a Mac.
It'll be the Mac version.
Natalie, I've been using it. It looks exactly the same.
Does it?
Yeah.
Right. Then all you need to do is find your raw file, which this one, on my system, and I just click on Open. That's it. And then import it into Lightroom like you would do any other photo.
Okay.
It's a lot easier than you think.
Well, I guess you've got to give it a go.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, to get results which will end up looking like this, once I show you the sharpening as well.
Yeah.
I think it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Using
Sure.
ISO 12,800.
You
No.
certainly can rescue pictures that you don't
Sorry?
think are good enough.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it may not make it an award-winning photo, but it makes it eminently more usable than it would have done before. Before, you might just have deleted it or not done anything with it. But now you can.
Yeah.
Is that Simon there, stood there?
I don't know. I don't think so. It might have been, but I don't think, if it was, he didn't say hello to me. So,
John, remember I talked about giving me a once-over stage about what I've got on my system? Because I've never really settled down to crack my Lightroom and Photoshop, mainly because I've obviously had other things to deal with in life. I mean, apart from doing that, I mean, could it be done online? Could one interrogate it from your system using whatever it is, Windows, to look at the Mac system by sharing the screen?
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Would you offer that service or opportunity? Like,
I can do. Bearing in mind, though, Eric, I only live down the corner from you, so.
Yeah, well, that would be even better.
Yeah,
it's just I'm finding stuff now that where you're talking that I didn't even know I had. And I'm just looking at the version I've got, which says 2021, so it's more up to date than I thought it was. I don't feel I've done anything since I got it, which was last year. Anyway, okay.
Yes, we can certainly do that.
Yeah.
But just remember that I'm off to Scotland for 2.5 weeks.
Oh no, I'm talking about an autumn, preparing myself for the winter lockdown.
No, just in case you were thinking we'll do it over the next month. So
No, I'll just keep saving my pictures the way they are at the minute. But I need to start mastering more of this software. It's one of my weak areas was post-production. I was so used to having my photographs, saving them away, put them on disk, put them in a hard drive or whatever. I've lost my filing system structure. And then when it comes to manipulation, I used to leave it to the lab. But this is where I've got to manage it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just looking at my hard drive. I don't think how many pictures are on here. Yeah.
Where are you going in Scotland?
I have got 4 nights in Ashing-Killin in the Trossachs.
Lovely.
And I've got 7 nights out on Lewis and Harris.
Oh, so lovely.
Stop it. We're all coming.
And then 3 nights on the Isle of Skye.
Very nice.
Everybody should go.
Absolutely.
We're going to Skye in February. It's probably a really bad time to go.
The roads will be dodgy because they always are in winter.
Yeah.
I'm going to be back up in Scotland again in January. So.
Are you? Oh, are you going up for Burns Night in any way?
No, I'll be going up on around about. I think I'm up there on the 6th.
I'll keep in touch with you because I'm likely to go up for Burns Night or have a week up there. Not that that will tie in with yours, but
no, I'm going up there on the 6th, and I'm I think for 5 nights, something like that.
Do you drive? Do you drive up?
Yes.
Yeah. How was you going to do it? Carry his knapsack?
When I was working it out today, if I wanted to go for 17 days, I've got a suitcase, camera bag, laptop case if it can't go in my suitcase, tripod.
Yeah, you can't.
Other ancillary stuff to carry. It's too much for 17 days.
Do you drive up in one, or do you stay over?
No, I'll stop in the Lake District. So I've got 2 nights in Cockermouth, which technically isn't Scotland. So
yeah, very nice. Sounds great.
Okay. So let's start with the next part, shall we?
Oh, okay.
It's just gone 9:05. So the next part What do you mean it's not sharp enough? Is sharpening really necessary? So why do we need to sharpen an image? So if you get the time to get everything right with your exposure, then you may not need to sharpen your photo at all. In fact, I don't touch sharpening on a lot of my photos. I'm shooting with a 45 megapixel camera. It comes out sharp if I have the time to get my photos sharp enough at the time of exposure. And that's always going to be the best time to actually get a sharp image. However, not every subject is accommodating. You know, if you're shooting a hummingbird, for example, as Steve will tell you, those things don't stay still for a minute. So, you know, you just don't get the opportunity. You might be using a shutter speed which is too slow for the subject. So, for example, if you're shooting on manual and you can't react fast enough to adjust your shutter speed, then you may get motion blur. If you're doing that, you might want to try changing to using aperture priority or, pardon me, shutter priority to make sure you guarantee to get your shutter speed right. You might have moved. No, I was taking some photos down at Porthcawl in a storm. It was 70-mile-an-hour winds. I was getting one shot with my feet, the next shot was the sky, then it was the horizon, not necessarily the level. So you know, you might get moved. You might get nudged if you're in the street. You might be using a camera with a low pixel count. That's not likely today. But, you know, I've got an Olympus E510 that was shooting at 10 megapixels. And I'm going to show you a photo which was taken with that camera and had a pixel count. Or you might have cropped the image to only leave a few pixels. You know, remember the one I took of the San Martin, I'd cropped that quite severely. And you might have to display that image big or seen close up. But who really worries about image sharpness? Well, you do. You know, we're all photographers. We worry about getting images sharp. Photography judges worry about sharp images. And pretty much nobody else. Nobody else will care whether your images are sharp or not. One of the things that I was doing during the summer was looking at old family photos. And some of you may remember when you were shooting photos back in the 70s and 80s, you'd send them off to the chemist and they'd come back and they'd be printed on that sort of silk effect photo paper, which meant the images really weren't that sharp. Nobody cared. And nobody cares now. If you show your family, somebody's not a photographer, an image which isn't sharp, they're probably not going to worry about it. As long as they can recognize who it is, they'll be quite happy. But viewing distance also has an impact here. In fact, all of these sharpening algorithms in things like Photoshop rely on an 8x10 print being viewed at a distance of about 15 inches. And they've come up with something called a circle of confusion, which is the smallest amount of detail that the human eye can resolve from that distance on that size print. And that became the basis for all of the sharpening that you can do in things like Lightroom, Photoshop, Affinity, and so on. And lastly, remember, a photograph is the only form of art where the viewing distance is dictated by the length of one's nose. You know, why do we get right up close to a photograph so to try and see individual pixels? You wouldn't do it with a painting. You wouldn't do it with sculpture unless you were a critic. So why do we do it with a photograph? So what does sharpening really do? Well, these principles were created by Bruce Fraser and Jeff Shue in 1990. They went on to work with Adobe. And their ideas are still being used today and are the heart of what we're going to call conventional sharpening techniques. So this is unsharp mask, high pass sharpening, something called edge sharpening, which we'll see. All of their ideas were created in 1990. You know, these things are 30 years old. And sharpening is really an illusion. And what it does is it adds contrast to edges, and that in itself can cause problems. So let's have a look at that. So what I've got is a photo, this stunning photo here. I'm going to send this over into Photoshop, and because I can demonstrate it much better in that. So here's the photo in Photoshop, and I'm going to use Smart Sharpen because it has a much more obvious way of showing the example. But Smart Sharpen is really nothing more than high pass sharpening and unsharp mask. So we've got some sliders in here. The only two I'm really interested in is amount and radius. Now, obviously, this photo is actually pretty sharp as it is, but if you over sharpen by pushing the amount up and pushing the radius up, you get that. So if you over sharpen, you get halos, and this is the cause of halos when you push the amount and the radius up too far. So this is something you need to avoid doing. Realistically, nobody's going to push the radius up to 64 pixels, but the radius you use is going to depend on your subject. But normally you would be around about 1 pixel, something like that. But even at 1 pixel, if you over sharpen by pushing the amount up too much, you can get halos, which can be obvious. If we zoom in and just move this around, you can see the halos. You can see the halo there on the edge. You can see how on the inside, hopefully at least, you can see it's gone dark, and on the outside it's gone light. And those are sharpening halos if you sharpen too much. And this is entirely a consequence, because what it's doing, it's making the inside, the darker parts of the image darker, and the outside, which is the lighter part, it's making those lighter. And this is why if I push the radius up, we see this quite hideous halo. And I see this quite a lot on a lot of our photos where people have pushed the sharpening sliders up too much, by the way.
It's not jumping on ahead, John. You're doing this in black and white because we're talking about tonal range. You'd get artifacts, presumably, if you did it in color. So it's actually working on the amount and the radius in black and white to get the optimum. Yeah.
I'm showing it in black and white because it's easier to show the halo.
Yeah. Okay.
But you still get the halos even if you're doing it in color.
Yeah.
Wherever you've got a transition between a dark object and a light object, you will get halos if you push your sharpening up too far. It's not a question of I might get it, you will get it.
Yeah. Okay.
So you want to keep your radius around about 1 pixel. That's going to be fairly good. And make sure you just simply don't push your amount up too much. But the key thing here is, I'm going to cover this again in a moment. All of these sharpening tools will say you should zoom in to 100%. And I think that's wrong. I actually think that's wrong. I think you should sharpen by looking at your image at the scale in which it's supposed to be seen. Because otherwise you get it misrepresents the sharpness. Your photos can look blurred even if they're not at a normal viewing distance. And this is why I really don't touch my sharpness at all. Okay. If you're printing, then you need to over sharpen your image. And the reason is, as I explained earlier about if you've got a noisy photo and you print it, the noise will disappear because the way the ink drops will splash into the paper, soak into the paper through capillary action. If you're printing on something like, say, matte paper, then you need to over sharpen the image to counter the fact that you've got this effect of the softening of the photo by the ink splashing and getting soaked in. And this is a quote which comes out of their book, which says, if you want to know what it looks like when you print it, then look at it. That's the only way to find out whether or not you need to sharpen your image. So what is conventional sharpening? Well, I've just shown you one part of it, but conventional sharpening comes in 3 main stages. You have input sharpening, and until recently, we had no control over this at all. This is all handled by either by the camera if you're shooting JPEG, or by the RAW converter if you're shooting RAW. Now we've got, you know, things like Topaz denoise, DxO Pure Raw, and On1 No Noise, which are RAW converters. So we've now got more control over it, and all of those applications you can tweak the sharpness. Stage 2 is what's called creative sharpening, and this is what most of us will regard as sharpening a photo. And this is entirely down to us. You know, again, we would normally be using things like unsharp mask, high pass sharpening, and edge sharpening. And then we have something called output sharpening, which will differ depending on how you're using the photo. So if you're showing the photo purely digitally, you don't need as much sharpening as you would do if you're printing it. But things like Lightroom give you an option when you're printing to apply additional sharpening if you need to. So I only process my images once. That's it. I don't have one version for digital display and another version for print. I process my images once, and then when I print, I'll apply additional printing as part, additional sharpening as part of that printing process. Again, I will show you that. So input sharpening. Now, modern cameras have something called an anti-aliasing filter, and this filter is designed to prevent diagonal lines looking like a staircase. But the downside to that is it can make your photos look a bit soft and lacking in detail. And that's because what it does, if you've got, imagine the image we were just looking at, this one, and we zoom in, we look at the diagonal. So zoom right in as far as we can. So you can see here that we've got this thing looking like a staircase on the diagonal part of the image. And we've got these different colored pixels here to try and make it look like it's not a staircase. And this is something called anti-aliasing. And most cameras will use a filter which applies this to prevent your images having this staircase effect. But it can make them look a bit soft. But it's really more applicable if you've got a low megapixel camera. Input sharpening is designed to minimize that softening effect. So it's adding more contrast in there. And then if you've got, some cameras don't have an anti-aliasing filter. So things like, for example, the Sony A7 Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV don't have an anti-aliasing filter. The Canon 5D didn't have an anti-aliasing filter. No doubt there'll be other cameras from Canon coming along which remove it. But if you have a high megapixel count camera, then you don't, and the manufacturer supplies it without an anti-aliasing filter, you won't notice that staircase effect simply because the pixels are smaller. So then we come on to the creative sharpening, and creative sharpening generally involves doing one of unsharp mask, high pass sharpening, or edge sharpening. So let's look at what these do. In fact, you've already seen some of these. If we go to filter, sharpen, unsharp mask, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because you know this anyway. So we have an amount slider, we've got a radius, and we've seen on here, you might be able to see through zoom that this has got a halo around the edge. And that's because I've got my radius at 0.9 and my amount is up to 226%. Now, if we push this right up and we push the radius right up, you know, you can probably see it even more now. In fact, that's gone pretty horrid, but you know, you never want to push a radius up to 9,000 pixels. But you know, if we put it up to 37. But this is unsharp mask, and what it's basically doing, it's masking out the areas which are sharp. I think it's a really confusing name, but that's what it's effectively doing. Then we have something called high pass sharpening, which allows us to go into the high pass filter, and then we can then, by adjusting the radius, just select the areas which aren't sharp, and then we'd start blending layers, which I'm not going to do here. And then the final one is edge sharpening, which is best done in either Camera Raw or in Lightroom. If we grab a suitable photo, let's grab this one. So this was a photo I took 10 years ago, 11 years ago, with an Olympus camera. If we zoom in, we can see it's not great, it's not that sharp, but we have something inside Lightroom for sharpening where we can push the sharpening slider up and we can mask out the areas. Oops, I keep forgetting that I'm in Lightroom. We can mask out the areas that aren't sharped by shifting the masking slider here. And basically what it's doing is putting a mask over the photo. So with a mask, anything which is black, the effect is not being applied to, and anything which is white, that is being applied. So we can actually take out the sharpening off the sky and off the faces of the mountain and just put it along the edge. This is an old image. It's 4,000 by 3,000, so it's a 12 megapixel image. This has come straight out of camera. So the sharpening here isn't great. So, you know, if we do zoom in, it's not sharp. And all of them do more or less the same thing. You know, even high pass sharpening is doing the same thing as unsharp mask. It's really just doing it in a different way. But if you want to do edge sharpening, which is what we're really talking about with getting images sharp, is making sure the edges stand out. It's best to do that either in Camera Raw and in Lightroom or Lightroom. And you can do those things after the event. After you've done all your processing, then you can apply sharpening. But the reality is it doesn't matter. These days, it doesn't matter when sharpening occurs. The recommendation was always to do it after you've done your processing. And the reason for that is simply because the mathematics involved is quite intensive. And at that time, computers weren't that powerful. Nowadays, you're not going to notice any difference in performance. But here's a couple of thoughts before we look at this. So I said earlier that traditional wisdom suggests you should zoom in to 100%. But as we've just seen on this photo, if I zoom in to, leave it out full size, it doesn't look that bad. But if I zoom into 100%, it's definitely not sharp. So bear that in mind. I don't zoom into 100% when I'm looking at my photos. I look at them at the normal viewing size, and that will then tell me whether or not I need to sharpen. And I will show you another example of that in a moment. So if you do zoom in, you can lead you to over sharpened images if you've got a high megapixel count photo, which is anything typically greater than 20 megapixels, or you're using a high pixel count display. I've got two monitors. I've got a 4K monitor and a 2K monitor, and I've noticed that photos which look fine in 2K can look over sharp on a 4K monitor. The thing is, you never know how your images are being viewed. So it's just something to bear in mind. So there you go. I don't zoom in at all. I'll leave them all at 100% and base my sharpening around that. And then, as we've seen, if you over sharpen, you can get halos, which are quite often worse than a soft image. Demo time. So if we take this photo, I am going to zoom in. And so this was processed using DxO Deep Prime. Although the ISO isn't that high, it was actually still quite a noisy image. And then I ran it through Topaz Sharpen AI, and it sharpens it up really quite nicely. And even more so if we flip between the two normal viewing size, you may not be able to see it, but I can definitely see it's sharper in the sharpened image. So run it through Topaz Sharpen. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to choose Edit In and Topaz Sharpen AI. I'm going to edit a copy with the Lightroom adjustments. So you do all of your adjustments first. And this will send it over to, can't see it. There we can. It's down there. This way. Sharpen AI, which looks remarkably like denoise. And again, I'm going to leave the settings on auto. Let's zoom in. Where's their zoom control? There it is. Let's zoom into 200%. Again, this needs to update. And then I can move this. Let's wait for it to update again because I moved it. This is the thing I hate about Topaz. It has to reprocess everything. So that's unsharpened, that's sharpened. And hopefully you can see that through Zoom. What I usually do is I start off with auto on both the image quality and the settings and see what that does. And then I decide actually whether or not I want to go with something which is very blurry. So it's just clicking these 6 buttons, which is all I typically do. And, you know, before, after, and hopefully you can see this through Zoom that it's sharper. Yes, no?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Then you just save the image. How much effort is that? It's none, right? Let's bin that.
Quite impressive, that is.
So that's on a landscape. Let's try a bit of wildlife. So a while ago, Lou sent me a photo. He sent me this photo and said, what did I think? And I looked at it and I looked at it and I looked at it and I thought, that doesn't look sharp to me. And so, you know, that's at this point I would zoom in. If we zoom in, it's actually noisy. It was shot at ISO 8000. And if we look around, it's not as sharp as we might like. So what did I do? I ran this through no noise. That gets rid of all the noise. No noise also does a little bit of sharpening. Let's just let this finish loading. So that's got rid of all the noise. And then I put it through Topaz denoise. And that just sharpens it up.
Wow.
Remember my photo of the San Martin, which looked like that?
Mm-hmm.
I did the same thing.
Oh.
That's after going through the denoise procedure and then sharpening. It's not ever going to be a 20-pointer, I concede. But that's so much sharper.
Yeah.
Let me show you something else. So this is a Douglas Dakota. That probably looks okay coming through Zoom. Let's zoom in. That's definitely not sharp. Okay, there's motion blur in there. This is shot at 1/60th of a second. Let me push this over to Sharpen AI. Here's the photo coming in. I'm just going to let it do its stuff. Notice how, you know, you can't read things like the UK on there. Now, this is motion blur. Sometimes Topaz doesn't always find the right model to use. So I'm just going to click on motion blur because that's what the blurriness is due to. Remember, the left-hand side is the original. The right-hand side is the version that's been sharpened. And hopefully now,
yeah,
you can see the difference.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is a motion blurred photo. You saw my photo of the mountain. It was a photo which was out of focus. Who said you can't fix out of photos? There you go. I mean, look at that. But we can actually go further than this. So let's close that. Back into Lightroom. So I'm going to send the original photo, which is this one, over to Photoshop. which is here. So this is the version in Photoshop. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to duplicate this layer. Then we'll send this over to Sharpen AI inside Photoshop. This has remembered my previous settings, so that's going to be perfect. I'll just wait for this to update. This just takes a little while. That's why I made the mistake and sent the original over, and I should have taken the one with Lightroom adjustments, I think. Again, this will work standalone. So yes, I'm using it as a plugin. It works fine as a plugin, but you can use this standalone as well if your software doesn't support plugins. This should work with Affinity Photo for those of you who are using Affinity. So this will just process the image and send it back to Photoshop. So if this sharpens areas and softens areas that you don't want sharpened, like, for example, maybe propellers, we can take it back into Photoshop, apply a mask to it, and mask out the areas that it's sharpened that we don't want sharpened.
Another form of painting, really.
Yeah, so here's the photo. So if we just zoom in, this is that's probably too far. This is the sharpened layer. Here's the unsharpened layer, and all I have to do is apply a mask, and with a black brush, I can just mask out the areas that I don't want sharpened, like maybe around the propellers. How easy is that?
Very amazing.
Now you can get sharp photos even with a little bit of motion blur. Photoshop has something to fix motion blur. It's something called shake reduction. This is where your camera is moving. I've never ever been able to actually get that to work terribly well. You have to specify this is the area to sample, this is the direction the shake has happened, which if your camera is moving, you have no idea which direction it's shaping or it's shaking. Whereas with Topaz Sharpen AI, you just drop the photo in there, piece of cake. So now with the noise reduction stuff that I've shown you and sharpening, there's no excuse not to get sharp photos, right?
No.
Then finally, output sharpening. So depending on your usage, additional sharpening may be required. So displays on LCD monitors are inherently sharper than printing. So, you know, once you get it sharp for display, then you don't need to worry about that's all you're doing. You just do it once, basically. If you're printing, then your images may be over sharp if displayed on a monitor. And this is why I don't advocate creating two versions of the same file, because there's something you can apply inside Lightroom and Photoshop, and I assume Affinity as well, where you can apply additional output sharpening. Then if you print on matte paper, you're going to require more sharpening than if you do it on gloss paper. And then finally, a lot of this information has come from this book by Jeff Shue and Bruce Fraser, Real World Image Sharpening with Adobe Photoshop, Camera Raw, and Lightroom. These guys are the fathers of digital image sharpening, and their stuff is still being used today. So the new sharpening techniques, the only AI version that I'm aware of today is Sharpening AI. And these can sharpen images even with motion blur or a little bit out of focus, quite remarkably. Running through the noise reduction applications discussed might be enough, because even the noise reduction will apply some sharpening. Sharpening AI will also do some noise reduction as well. So high megapixel count cameras may not even need sharpening at all. Let me show you an example. So some of us went up to Primrose Hill, and we took to get the moon coming over the Shard. Simon had a fantastic photo of that in on Monday last week. So this is a photo shot at ISO 100, and hopefully you can see with zoom that this looks pretty sharp. Right, I was on a tripod, I had time to get it right. It looks pretty sharp. If we zoom in on the BT tower, that looks pretty sharp, right? This is zoomed in 200%. I run it through the sharpening application, and yes, this looks sharper.
Yeah.
But if I show you a normal size and just flick between them, can you tell the difference?
No.
Yeah.
So this is a photo. This is a reason why I look at my things at normal viewing distance, decide whether or not something needs to be sharpened or not. Because if I look at it at 100%, it looks like it could be soft and needs sharpening. But of normal viewing distance, if I cannot see a lack of sharpness there, then I don't worry about sharpness. I don't go in and sharpen it.
I take it you can over sharpen.
Oh, you absolutely can over sharpen without question.
Yeah.
If I take this photo, this is the original image, and I push my sharpening up and I push my radius up, this will start to get really quite, and if you look at the trees in particular, this looks really quite rough.
No, I mean, would that happen if you put an image that doesn't really need it? If you put that through AI sharpen, would the same thing happen?
You'd have to look at it and find out.
Right.
There's no way to be able to predict it because it depends on the image.
Yeah.
Most times I don't bother sharpening my photos because they just simply don't need it. You know, my camera is a 45 megapixel camera, so it's got quite a high resolution anyway. So yes, so let's go back into Lightroom. So when it comes to printing, I have an option in printing to add some print sharpening just here. So if I'm going to print on glossy paper or luster paper, then I can apply additional sharpening. Actually, that probably ought to be on that. And then I've got an option to choose either low, standard or high. And the value you use for that, you need to actually test for yourself. There's no way to say for this particular photo, use low, this one use standard. You need to test this yourself on your paper. So this is when you're exporting from Lightroom, and you can do the same thing from Photoshop as well. So for the paper that I've got selected here, which is Oyster, it's a luster paper, I would have that set to glossy with standard sharpening. And so it applies this extra bit of sharpening when I print the photo. If you're going to export the image, then we have an option in here, because I always export from Photoshop, sorry, from Lightroom. We have an extra option in here for output sharpening. So I can output sharpen for the screen. Don't know why it's not letting me do that, but anyway, I can. Oh, it's because it's DNG, that's why. So I can apply some extra output sharpening for the screen and standard. And so that's why I only have one version of the image and then we export it twice. Okay. So in conclusion, Sharpen AI produces great results even in soft images. Dead easy to use. Again, it comes as a fully functional demo version, so download it, try it out, and there's the link to it.
And is that also a standalone or plugin?
You can use it either way.
Is one way better than the other?
Not really, because you're passing over an intermediate file anyway, TIFF or JPEG.
Right.
And so I use it as a plugin from Lightroom if I need to do sharpening.
From Lightroom, because didn't you do that from Photoshop?
You can do it from Photoshop as well. Right. You can do it either way. whichever makes sense for your particular photo.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
And that's it. So unless there's any other questions.
Thanks very much, John. Thanks
Thank
a
you
lot.
very, very much. Thank you.
Silence, I'd say they're probably not many, but I hope this has made your Lightroom collections 3 times bigger than they were previously.
Mm.
Now,
so.
images that you might have just previously ignored.
I have quite a backlog of images to go and look at.
Well, this one of the things I'm working on is to photograph every county in the UK, and one of the key features of a city is going to be a cathedral, and a lot of the cathedrals you can't use a tripod or a monopod in there, so you have to bump the ISO. You can't do it any other way. And so this is a way I can actually go in there and I can take photos and process them and show them to people and not have people say, oh, that looks really noisy or it doesn't look sharp. Not something I need to worry too much about if I'm doing a landscape, because I'm generally on a tripod anyway. Anything else?
No, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, John, perhaps just to emphasize a point you made with my coot.
That's rude.
You can set a much higher shutter speed, sacrifice ISO and sharpen afterwards and get rid of the noise afterwards.
Yes.
That enables you in a situation like that to jack up your shutter speed way beyond what you normally could. Get a slightly noisy picture, but sort it out afterwards.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The noise reduction applications that are available today are remarkably good. I do think that DxO Pure Raw is probably the best one out there, but the workflow is convoluted. But No Noise does a perfectly good job, and it'll be interesting to see what Adobe come up with. One of the things that Adobe have already given a sneak preview for Lightroom is they are reimagining the way that the radial filter, the graduated filter and the adjustment brush are going to work. Oh, I didn't think it was that bad. They reimagined.
Sorry, that's my dog.
Bringing more AI stuff into Lightroom, and they've said there'll be more AI stuff coming later on down the line. So this is why I'm saying it would not surprise me if they reimagine the way the noise reduction and the sharpening works in both Photoshop and Lightroom to do what I've just talked about here. That's coming. So the version of Lightroom comes out in 2 weeks.
If you look at old black and white pictures from the days of film, they're really not sharp, although we saw them as being sharp.
Yeah.
Compared to now, it's light years away.
Exactly, which is why I said earlier that most people don't care about the images.
No, but we expect too much now, I think.
Yeah. Unfortunately, because most of those images from the days of yore, when you scan them, are going to come in as JPEGs, they're not going to sharpen up that well.
Yeah.
So you can't really rescue those because the information just simply isn't there. Believe me, I've tried.
Very good, John.
Anybody else? Any other comments?
Yes, I've got a sore head.
Paracetamol.
I mean, the thing is really there's nothing complicated here.
No.
You're going to get the applications, you drop the photos in it, and that's it. Most of the time, you'll leave it on auto. The only one you might change would be with the sharpening and the blur. Sometimes you might need to click on one or two buttons, but you're not shifting sliders around. So most of the time it's pretty easy.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
So Tim, you don't need to fret about shooting at high ISO now.
I'll still fret.
It's what you get used to, what you're familiar with, really. So, John, was this the idea that came from asking the club members what they wanted, and I didn't fill it in? This idea of this sort of seminar come instruction evenings.
It's partly that, but also, you know, we're struggling to find things to put into members' workshops.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, watching people's AVs, you know, are fantastic. It's great to see them. But sometimes, you know, you want something a bit more than that. And this is something that, you know, I could pitch at all levels of skill here, because really using it is a piece of cake. You're just dropping a photo inside an application and you're not using any sliders, you're not painting stuff, you're just leaving stuff on auto. So anybody can do this. So this would seem to be an easy one to do.
Yeah. So it's just using the concept of it, basically, and just doing it, letting it do itself. Yeah.
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 The next one I'm going to do is going to be a little bit more complicated.
Oh God.
John, can I just ask a question? I've had two-pair sharpening the trial on my computer, but it was so slow. So obviously at some stage I've got to upgrade my computer. So is it the speed I need to concentrate on, the memory, or what computer would I need for it to work?
It's hard to say without knowing what you've got at the moment.
That's an ended question, that one.
Yeah.
It's really hard to say. I don't know how much memory you've got at the moment,
Right.
and all this kind of stuff. So there's quite a few things. The computer I've got here isn't state of the art by any stretch of the imagination, but it's got 32 gig of RAM. It's got an i7 something other processor. I think it's about 7th generation.
Right.
Until are currently on 11th, I think, at the moment. So it's not state of the art by any means, but it's a reasonably powerful machine.
Right. So,
And it's packed with SSDs as well. So.
Okay. Thank you.
If it helps, I've been running on two machines, one of which is an 8-year-old Mac. iMac. It does have a lot of memory on it, but the speed's absolutely fine. And it's an 8-year-old machine.
Yeah, I've got the same machine, I think.
I've got 24 gigabytes of memory on it, so quite a lot.
Lou,
Yeah.
I thought I can't remember exactly what my Mac is. It's quite old, but as far as I know, I've gone as far as I can with versions of Lightroom and Photoshop. That I can't upgrade to the newer versions of Lightroom or Photoshop because my computer won't support them.
Oh, well, we can have a separate discussion on this. But I've got, my Mac is, just looking at it, it's 2012, late 2012, and I'm running the latest Photoshop and Lightroom on it.
Mine is 10.13.6.
Okay, we could have a separate discussion and compare notes.
I thought that I'd gone as far as I could with upgrading Lightroom and Photoshop.
Wow.
Newer versions of Lightroom and Photoshop want to use the graphics card to do a lot of the processing. So if you've got an old graphics card, it may not support Photoshop and Lightroom.
Yeah.
You reach a point where you have to buy something new. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat.
Unfortunately,
I've been astonished. I bought myself a very new MacBook, and it's a high spec one, and it's approximately twice as fast as my 9-year-old iMac.
But have you got a big screen with it?
Yeah, I've got a separate screen, but twice as fast
Yeah.
is very little. So something that takes, 1 second on the old iMac takes half a second on the new machine. You don't notice the difference.
Yeah, yeah.
My computer is old enough that I cannot upgrade to Windows 11. So I'm going to have to upgrade some of it sometime in the next 4 years.
Oh, so that does happen.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
So that would be a new motherboard and a new CPU at some stage in the next 4 years.
But yeah, more and more now, it's the GPU that graphics packages are making advantage of.
Yeah.
So same with Affinity. It's your best getting it's the higher spec GPUs that actually give you all the performance.
Unfortunately,
Natalie, just if you click on the Apple logo and then about this Mac.
Yeah, I did.
And that'll tell you exactly what it is.
Yeah, I did. It's 10.13.6.
Yeah, how much memory have you got?
16 gigabytes.
Well, that should be sufficient. It's probably
It should be all right.
CPU.
And yet when I have, because I'm on Adobe CC, which allows you to upgrade, as new updates come out.
Yeah.
And the last time it came out and I tried to update, it said that I couldn't.
Gosh.
Yeah. It's probably your GPU stopping you from doing it.
So I've got it. So does that mean I've got to buy a new laptop?
Does it say what the date is of the machine?
Oh, I can't remember when I got it. Let me see. No, it doesn't.
Yeah,
It probably
2013.
Natalie, yours isn't an iMac, it's a laptop, is it?
It's a laptop, yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, laptop.
It probably means you'll need to get a new one, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think John's on the money when he talked about the graphics card, because the iMac has a much faster, I guess, graphics card than the laptops.
Right.
This is going to be of no consolation at all to you, but Stan a while ago said he couldn't update to Photoshop and Lightroom because he was using, although he was using a PC, he was using a non-CPU graphics processor, which Adobe won't support. So he had to go out and put a new graphics card into his computer. You may be able to do the same thing with your laptop, but that's something that only Apple will be able to tell you.
I would not know where to even start.
And
you have to contact
Best to get a new machine.
yeah,
It is. I mean, I use this machine every single day of my life.
Yeah.
It's my work and it's my life. It's everything. So
Company expense.
yeah, well, yeah, it's just part of that's wear and tear as well. We load so much onto these machines.
Unfortunately, these things will need replacing over time.
Sure,
There's
of course.
no way to avoid it.
It's okay. I hand them down to whoever else. It's my husband.
But do you back it up onto something, onto a hard drive of some sort?
I've got a little lacy hard drive that I put all my photos onto. Those are backed up. And I've got another backup system, which I really need to do. I haven't done for a while. And every now and again, I back up everything on my computer onto that.
Yeah, so if you've got the original, then it wouldn't be a problem to import it into a...
No. I've done that before. I know how to do that.
I wish I did. Oh, some advice.
It pretty much tells you what to do when you plug it in. It just asks you if you want to import everything, and you just say yes, please, and it does it for you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if
Okay, thanks, John.
nobody
Thank
else,
you very, very much, John. That was really helpful.
Thanks, John.
Thank you very much.
Excellent talk as usual.
Thank you, John. Have a good evening.
thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Have a
Thanks
great
very
time.
much indeed. I'm
Have a
finding
great-
things on my computer I didn't know I had.
Oh,
Got more porn, dear me.